Strap in, everyone. Today we're diving deep into a legal whirlwind surrounding, you guessed it, a certain internet personality, Nicholas Rekieta. And get this, our main source today is, well, it's Kiwi Farms.
Ah, Kiwi Farms.
You know, that forum known for dissecting and, to be frank, sometimes just roasting online figures.
It's a unique corner of the internet, that's for sure. A place where, well, let's just say opinions are shared freely.
So for those tuning in, let's just quickly recap. Who exactly is this Nicholas Rekieta, and what was he doing before all this went down?
Okay, so Rekieta, he's a former lawyer, not practicing anymore, though. But he kind of made a name for himself by talking about legal stuff online, like, breaking it down, explaining it for the everyday internet user. But over the last few years, his reputation has taken a hit, some personal issues, some controversies, and it's all sort of culminated in this current situation.
Right, and that's where things get, well, really interesting. We're talking about one specific incident, May 16th, 2024. That's when this legal saga really kicked off. From what we're seeing on Kiwi Farms, multiple reports of potential child abuse at Rekieta's home led to police getting involved.
Yeah, and it wasn't just any reports, These were mandatory reporters, the kind of folks who were legally obligated to report suspected abuse. And to make things even more complicated, the police reportedly saw some things on Rekieta's own live stream, enough to get a warrant, enter his home.
And so they go into his house. What's the scene like? What do they find?
Oh, it's like something out of a movie, Cluttered house, Rekieta resisting entry, and then boom, drugs, firearms, the whole 9 yards. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This was serious stuff.
Okay, so you said drugs and firearms. What are the specific charges he's facing because of this?
All right, so Rekieta, along with his wife Kayla, are looking at some heavy charges. First up, possession of a controlled substance. We're talking over 25 grams of cocaine. That's enough to trigger a second-degree felony charge, which is, well, that's a big deal. We're talking a maximum sentence of 25 years, maybe even a $500,000 fine.
Wow, that's life-changing, to say the least. But it doesn't stop there, right?
Right, there's more. On top of the drugs, there's unlawful possession of a firearm and ammunition by a controlled substance user, and that's considered a gross misdemeanor.
What about Kayla, his wife? Is she facing the same charges?
She's facing the drug charge and the firearm charge, but there's one more, and it's particularly disturbing. They hit her with endangerment of a child. And this is where things get really heavy, because the charge specifically mentions knowingly permitting physical or sexual abuse.
So in addition to all the drugs and firearms, we're also talking potential abuse allegations.
Oh.
It's getting very complicated. So what happens next in all of this?
All right, this is where it gets interesting, really interesting. Rekieta, instead of, getting a fancy lawyer or legal team, he decides to represent himself and his wife during the arraignment. And it doesn't stop there. He even tries to represent a third person who was involved, but then realizes she's already been released.
Hold on. Who is this third person?
Her name's April Impolt. And, well, according to the Kiwi Farms threads, she's been romantically linked to Rekieta. Turns out she's also the ex-wife of one of his former friends. Later on, Impolt gets charged with cocaine possession, too, all stemming from that same incident at Rekieta's place. It's like everyone who gets close to him ends up caught in the drama.
Okay, so we have Rekieta representing himself, a whole bunch of charges, this tangled web of relationships. What happened at this arraignment?
Well, what's wild is there's actually footage of it online. You don't see that every day, right? It gives us a real peek behind the curtain of these legal proceedings.
That's pretty rare. So
Right.
What was the outcome? Was Rekieta released?
He was, yeah. But not without strings attached. He got hit with a $50,000 bond, has to stay law-abiding, can't leave Minnesota, no drugs or alcohol, random testing, weekly check-ins, and of course, no firearms allowed. Pretty standard stuff when you're facing charges like these.
It sounds like the court wasn't messing around, especially with those string conditions. Did he just accept all of that and move forward with his case?
He didn't. He actually filed an appeal on October 25th, 2024, trying to challenge what the lower court decided on a specific legal motion he'd made. It's called a Frank's motion. Basically, he was trying to argue that the police lied to get the search warrant, trying to get the evidence they found thrown out.
So he was trying to invalidate all the evidence from his home. Did this appeal actually work?
Not a chance. The appeal docket number A24-1683, by the way, got denied about a month later on November 19th.
All right, so we've got the legal timeline, the initial incident, the charges, the arraignment, release, failed appeal. But we haven't really touched on how this is all playing out online, especially on Kiwi Farms, Remember, that's our main source here, and I'm really curious to see how they're reacting to all of this.
You know Kiwi Farms. They're buzzing. This is their bread and butter online drama. They're picking apart every detail, every legal move, everything Rekieta says publicly.
So are they basically like a Greek chorus watching Rekieta's downfall?
That's one way to put it. And while they're not dismissing the seriousness of the charges, there's this undercurrent of mockery, this anticipation of his potential downfall.
So they're not exactly offering sympathy then.
Not really, no. It's this mix of morbid curiosity, dark humor, and what some might call schadenfreude.
Can you give us some specific examples of what's being said on the forum?
Absolutely. One thing that jumps out is how they're pointing out that Rekieta threaded the needle with that amount of cocaine. He was just barely over the limit for that more serious charge. It's like they're both impressed and condemning him at the same time.
So they find his risk-taking kind of fascinating, even though it's self-destructive.
You got it. And there are polls popping up asking how long until he breaks his release conditions. It's like they're placing bets on his downfall.
Wow. So they're not just watching, they're actively participating in this whole drama, like they're characters in the story.
Exactly. And there's a lot of skepticism about his legal strategy, you know. They're predicting more insane motions, questioning if he can really represent himself. It's like they see him trying to game the system, but failing miserably.
They're not buying into the whole self-representation thing then.
Not really. They see him as in over his head, making bad choices that'll just make things worse.
It's wild, right? Like they're predicting his next move, like they're invested in this whole thing going a certain way.
Yeah, that's Kiwi Farms for you. They really go deep on these online personalities. Sometimes it's almost like an obsession. It's a community that, well, they love drama and dissecting the lives of, people they deem worthy of their attention.
We've talked a lot about what Rekieta did, the legal side of it all, but I'm kind of curious about Kiwi Farms' role in this whole thing. Are they just reflecting this like broader internet culture, this fascination with drama and downfall, or are they actively, contributing to it?
That's a good question. It's that whole chicken or the egg thing, right?
Yeah.
Are they just reflecting something that's already there, or are they shaping the narrative, making the drama even bigger? It's probably a bit of both.
It really makes you think about these online communities, how much power they have to influence what people think, even when it's something as serious as a legal case.
Oh, absolutely. This whole thing is playing out so publicly, and Kiwi Farms is like this online arena, where everyone's gathering, commenting, speculating.
And because it's such a close-knit community with its own, rules and values, it's almost like they're building their own reality around this case.
Yeah, they have their own language, their own jokes, their own way of understanding what's happening. It's an interesting subculture for sure. But it also brings up some ethical concerns,
Yeah, especially when you think about Rekieta's right to a fair trial. How can you separate all that online chatter from what's actually happening in court?
That's a tough one. It raises questions about the whole role of social media and online communities in our justice system.
This whole case feels like a microcosm of this bigger issue, right? Like, how do we navigate these blurry lines between the online world and the real world?
Exactly. It makes us think about our own responsibility when we see information online,
Yeah.
We need to be critical, think for ourselves, separate fact from fiction, and not get swept up in the hype and drama.
We got to remember that behind all those usernames and forum posts, there's a real person with real consequences.
That's so important. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement, the sensationalism of it all, but we can't lose sight of the human side of things.
That's a great point. You've really given us a lot to think about today, both about this specific case and, the bigger picture of internet culture and the legal system.
It's a complex landscape, constantly changing. I think this case really highlights some of the challenges we face as we try to navigate this digital world.
Definitely. So before we wrap up this deep dive, let's bring it back to our listeners. As we've been discussing Rekieta and what's going on Kiwi Farms, what are your thoughts? What stands out to you? Is it interesting, disturbing?
I'm curious, have you ever seen a situation where the online commentaries seem to completely overshadow the actual facts of a case?
We're seeing it more and more these days, right?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder about the role these online platforms have in shaping public opinion.
For sure. This case is a great example of that intersection of internet culture, legal stuff, and the power of these online communities. It reminds us that we're all part of this ecosystem, whether we realize it or not.
So we've talked about the legal side of things, the role of Kiwi Farms, the implications for internet culture. But before we go, I'm going to leave you with one final thought. Do you think platforms like Kiwi Farms ultimately help create these internet personalities, or do they play a role in their downfall?
That's a good one. No easy answer there. On one hand, you have these platforms giving these personalities a stage, a way to get attention. They thrive on all the drama, the controversy, the larger-than-life personas we see online.
But then those same platforms can turn on them,
Yeah.
right? Exposing their flaws, amplifying mistakes, contributing to their downfall. It's a double-edged sword.
Absolutely. And like we've seen with Rekieta, the line between, fame and infamy can be razor thin, especially in that online world. It's a volatile place.
It creates this weird feedback loop, doesn't it?
Totally. It's like the more outrageous someone is, the more attention they get, and then they just get more and more outrageous. Hard to escape that cycle.
Well, and it's not just, Rekieta. We see it everywhere online, right?
Yeah.
All kinds of communities, platforms. It's the same pattern.
It's just part of how things are now. Attention is everything. Being notorious is, like, better than being good.
You were saying before how Kiwi Farms loves drama, controversy. What's that mean for someone like Rekieta, who's got all these serious charges hanging over him?
It's got to be tough. I mean, all that scrutiny, people making fun of him, it can't be easy to separate that from the real legal stuff.
And you wonder about, his right to a fair trial. Can a jury really be unbiased when they've seen so much negativity online?
It's a real concern. It makes you think about how our legal system is supposed to work in this, wild west of online discussion.
All right, well, we've covered a lot of ground today. The legal ins and outs of Rekieta's case, Kiwi Farms' role in this whole thing, the bigger implications for internet culture and the legal system. It's been a lot.
Yeah, it has. Hopefully we've shed some light on all the moving parts, all the challenges we face, trying to understand this whole digital age.
For sure. Before we wrap up, anything else you want to add? Any final thoughts, insights for our listeners?
I think it's important to remember that, yeah, we've been talking about Rekieta and all this craziness, but these issues, they affect everyone.
In what way?
Well, think about it. We're all part of these online communities in some way, right? We're reading stuff, sharing our opinions, having these conversations that can have real impacts.
Right. It's easy to forget that the internet isn't some separate world. It's connected to our lives, real people, real feelings.
Exactly. And this case is a prime example. What you do online can have real-world consequences.
So what do we do? How do we be better, more responsible in this digital world?
I think it starts with awareness. We need to understand how powerful these platforms are, these communities. We got to think critically, figure out what's true, what's not, and try not to get sucked into the drama.
Remember that there are actual people behind those usernames.
Exactly. And we got to treat each other with respect, even when we disagree.
Well said. We hope this deep dive is giving you something to think about. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. That's all for today, folks. Thanks for listening.